If the Bible is perfectly consistent and Jesus is all knowing, then you're going to have a hard time explaining why the author of John has Jesus making such a grievous blunder. Welcome back to Pesky Passages, where we problematize the Bible in pursuit of de-weaponizing certainty and increasing love. Alright, let's jump into the Gospel of John and see if you can spot where the problem is. In John 3, Jesus is speaking with Nicodemus about being born from above when he says this in verse 13. No one has ascended into heaven except the one who descended from heaven, the Son of Man. Now, for those of you a little more familiar with your Bible, you may already know where this is heading. And for those of you that aren't as familiar, there's actually a very famous ascension story in the Hebrew Bible, which would have occurred hundreds of years before Jesus. Let me introduce you to Elijah. Elijah was the preeminent prophet, ranking alongside Moses as a central Hebrew figure and one of two human beings that were described as never experiencing death. This is how his last moments were detailed in 2 Kings 2:11. As they continued walking and talking, a chariot of fire and horses of fire separated the two of them, and Elijah ascended in a whirlwind into heaven. There's no denying the tension in these two passages. If you understand the words of Jesus to convey a universal, literal travel claim, which is the plain reading of the text, it's absolute. No one has ascended into heaven. And the reason that matters is that the author of John is using this to claim exclusivity in Jesus. It's not a throwaway detail. It's part of the claim. Jesus is the one exception. Which is exactly why Elijah is such a problem. Because 2 Kings doesn't describe Elijah as experiencing death. It describes him as being taken up. And the language isn't subtle or ambiguous. Elijah, almost word for word, ascends into heaven. Now, for my more apologetically minded folks out there who want to argue that Elijah went to a different heaven than what Jesus was talking about. Both the Greek New Testament and the Septuagint, the Greek Old Testament, use the exact same word, with zero built-in lexical distinction. So now you're stuck with two biblical claims that don't politely step around each other. John wants no one to mean no one except Jesus. And Kings preserves a story where someone else is described as ascending. Now, if you are someone who grew up with the idea that the Bible is perfectly consistent, this may be the moment where you start to feel the floor shift. Because an honest reading doesn't allow the plain reading of both sentences to work at the same time. And if that is the case, this is where the consequences start to show up. Because if John 3 is a real universal claim, then 2 Kings 2 is false. And if 2 Kings 2 is meant to be understood as it plainly reads, then John 3 can't be understood in this same straightforward way. So what do we do with it? Especially if you've been taught that the Bible is not allowed to have contradictions. You end up with a set of options that all cost you something. Option 1, Jesus was mistaken when he said it, which means that's a direct hit to omniscience. Option 2, Jesus knew that Elijah went up, but said it anyway, which means we're now in Jesus was a liar territory, and I don't think anybody wants to say that. Option 3, theologize your way out of it. Make it work no matter how much stretching it takes. Or option 4, admit that the author of John is using sweeping, absolutizing language to make Jesus exclusive, and he either forgot, ignored, or didn't care that the Hebrew Bible already had an ascent story. You can understand why so many people go with option 3. It may be the furthest stretch, but it costs your Bible doctrines the least. But if you're willing to sit and wrestle with it, I would argue that option 4 is best. It lets you maintain your integrity while loosening your grip on a perfect Bible, instead of forcing you to call Jesus mistaken or deceptive, or forcing yourself into some sort of anti-intellectual cognitive dissonance. The truth is, the Bible is a library of texts written over centuries of evolving peoples and cultures, so we should read it as such. In John, the point isn't that Jesus just knows things. It's that Jesus is the one who can speak about God with first-hand authority. That's what the gospel author is trying to establish. And that matters because it shows that John is comfortable using broad strokes of language to show that Jesus is exclusive, even when older biblical traditions contain exceptions, like Elijah. Or Enoch, which we didn't even mention. So the contradiction doesn't have to force you into calling Jesus a liar or stripping him of divinity. It can force a different adjustment instead, letting go of the idea that the Bible uses a single, perfectly harmonized voice. John is doing theology. Kings is preserving a revered story, and the Bible holds both, without the need to smooth them into one unified narrative. That is not a reason to throw the text away. It's a reason to read it more seriously, like it actually is. Layered, historically situated, and sometimes in tension with itself, without requiring you to sacrifice your integrity to defend perfection or certainty. Let's not make the goal to force the Bible to be true at all costs, but instead to learn how to read it with honesty. Faithfulness isn't defending perfection and certainty, but instead choosing humility when it's complicated. So if you're someone who's done with the mental gymnastics of it all and ready for a truer way to read, you're in the right place. Come along. You're welcome here.